Imagine a world where every financial decision you make brings you one step closer to your dreams. A place where money is not a source of stress, but a powerful tool that works for you, creating a future full of possibilities. In The Good Habit of Saving, Napoleon Hill, the legendary author, guides us through the essential principles for building a solid financial foundation and achieving the economic freedom you've always desired. Saving doesn't mean sacrifice, it means strategy, vision, and control. This text will take you beyond the simple mathematics of money and reveal how to develop a mindset of abundance. Through Hill's lessons, you will discover how small, consistent, and disciplined steps can unleash profound changes in your life, transforming you into the architect of your own success. Get ready to learn, reflect, and take action. This is not just a text, it's the first chapter in the story of your financial independence. Are you ready to begin? The journey towards sustainable wealth starts here. The only lasting service a father can render to his child is to help them help themselves. Man is a combination of flesh, bone, blood, hair, and brain cells. These are the materials from which he shapes his own personality through the law of habit. To advise saving money without explaining how to do it would be like drawing a horse and writing underneath, "This is a horse." It is self-evident to everyone that saving money is one of the essential elements of success. But the big question for most people who don't save is, how can I do it? Saving money is purely a matter of habit, which is why this lesson begins with a brief analysis of the law of habit. It is literally true that man, through the law of habit, shapes his own personality, and through repetition, any act performed a few times becomes a habit. Once a habit is ingrained in the mind, it drives us to action automatically. For example, if you take a specific route to work every day, very soon this will become a habit, and your mind will automatically guide you along this route without thinking. On the other hand, if you start intending to travel in another direction without constantly keeping the idea of changing your route in mind, you will find yourself following the old route. Public speakers have discovered that by repeatedly telling a story based on pure fiction, the law of custom comes into play, and very soon they forget whether the story is true or not. The walls of limitation built by custom cause millions of people to live their lives in poverty and want because they have made destructive use of the law of habit without understanding either the law of habit or the law of attraction, by which like attracts like. Those who remain in poverty rarely realize that they are where they are because of their own actions. Fix in your mind the thought that your ability is limited to a certain level of income and that you will never earn more than that, because the law of custom will establish a definitive limitation on the amount you can earn. Your subconscious mind will accept this limitation, and very soon you will feel yourself slipping until eventually you are so wrapped in the fear of poverty, one of the 6 basic fears, that opportunity will no longer knock at your door. Your ruin will be sealed, your fate set. The formation of the habit of saving does not mean that you must limit your earning capacity. On the contrary, you must apply this law not only to systematically conserve what you earn, but also to place yourself on the path to greater opportunities and give yourself the vision, self-confidence, imagination, enthusiasm, initiative, and leadership to actually increase your earning capacity. In expressing this great law in another way, when you deeply understand the law of habit, you can ensure success in the great game of making money by playing both ends of this game against fear. First, through the law of the defined main goal, you establish in your mind a precise and defined description of what you want, including the amount of money you intend to earn. Your subconscious mind takes over this image you have created and uses it as a plan, a map, or a roadmap to shape your thoughts and actions into practical plans to achieve the object of your main goal or purpose. Through the law of habit, you keep the object of your defined main goal fixed in your mind as described in Lesson 2 until it is firmly and permanently implanted. This practice will eliminate the consciousness of poverty and replace it with a consciousness of prosperity. You will begin to demand prosperity, expect it, prepare to receive it, and use it wisely, paving the way or preparing the ground for the development of the habit of saving. In the second place, once you have increased your earning power, you will make further use of the law of habit by including in your written statement of your defined main goal the saving of a specific amount of all the money you earn. Thus, as your income increases, your savings will also increase proportionally. By pushing yourself on one hand to demand an increase in your income, and on the other hand to systematically save a certain amount of all your income, you will establish mental and financial habits that will inevitably lead you toward financial success. Soon, you will reach the point where you will have eliminated all imaginary limitations of your own mind and will be well on your way to financial independence. Nothing is more practical or easier to do than this. Reverse the operation of the law of habit by establishing in your mind the fear of poverty, and very soon, this fear will reduce your earning capacity to the point where you can barely earn enough money to meet your current needs. Newspaper editors could create panic in a week by filling their columns with news of the actual failures of businesses across the country, even though only a small number of businesses, compared to the total number in existence, actually fail. The so-called waves of crime are largely a product of sensationalist journalism. One single murder case, when exploited by newspapers with frightening headlines, is enough to trigger a regular wave of similar crimes in several localities. After the repetition of the hitman murder story in newspapers, similar cases began to be reported in other parts of the country. We are victims of our habits, no matter who we are or what our vocation is. Any idea deliberately fixed in the mind, or any idea allowed to establish itself as a result of suggestion, environment, the influence of associates, etc., is sure to lead us into actions that correspond to the nature of the idea. Form the habit of thinking and talking about prosperity and abundance, and very soon the material evidence of these will begin to manifest in the form of broader and new, unexpected opportunities. Like attracts like. If someone is dedicated to business and has developed the habit of thinking and saying that business is bad, business will have that characteristic. A pessimist, as long as they are allowed to continue their destructive influence for long enough, can destroy the work of half a dozen competent men, leaving in the minds of their associates the thoughts of poverty and failure. Do not be this kind of man or woman. One of the most successful bankers in the state of Illinois has a sign hanging in his private office that says, "Here, we only talk and think about abundance. If you have a story of misfortune, please keep it, because we don't want it." No business wants the services of a pessimist, and those who understand the law of attraction and the law of habit will not tolerate the pessimist any more than a thief lurking around their workplace. The reason for this is that a person of this kind will destroy the efficiency of those around them by leaving in their minds the thought of poverty and failure. In tens of thousands of homes, the general subject of conversation is poverty and need, and that is exactly what they receive. They think about poverty, talk about it, accept it as their fate in life, believing that, since their ancestors were poor before them, they must also remain so. The consciousness of poverty forms as a result of the habit of thinking about and fearing poverty. What I have had until now came to me through the slavery of debt. Debt is our relentless master, a fatal enemy of the habit of saving. Poverty alone is enough to annihilate ambition, destroy self-confidence, and extinguish hope. But if the burden of debt is added, anyone who is a victim of these two cruel masters is practically condemned to failure. No man can do his work better. No man can express himself in terms that command respect. No man can create or carry out a definite purpose in life with a heavy debt hanging over his head. The man who is chained in the slavery of debt is as powerless as the slave bound by ignorance or by real chains. The author has a very close friend whose income is $1,000 per month. His wife loves society and tries to display $20,000 worth of lifestyle on an income of $12,000, often resulting in a debt of $8,000 for this poor man. All the members of his family have the habit of spending, which they inherited from their mother. The children and the teenager are now of an age to think about going to college, but it is impossible due to the father's debts. The result is a disagreement between the father and his children, which makes the entire family unhappy and miserable. It is terrible even to consider living like a prisoner chained by debts. The accumulation of debt is a habit that begins slowly and gradually grows, step by step, until it eventually takes control of the very soul itself. Thousands of young people begin their married life burdened with unnecessary debts hanging over their heads and never manage to free themselves from this burden. Once the novelty of marriage begins to fade, as often happens, the married couple starts to feel the shame of lack, a feeling that often grows until it leads to open dissatisfaction with one another and ultimately to divorce court. A man chained by the slavery of debt has neither the time nor the inclination to establish or work on ideals, causing him to drift over time until he eventually begins to build limits in his own mind and locks himself behind the walls of the prison of fear and debt, from which he never escapes. No sacrifice is too great to avoid the misery of debt. Think about what you owe to yourself and those who depend on you, and decide not to owe anyone. This is the advice of a very successful man whose early opportunities were destroyed by debt. This man woke up early enough to break the habit of buying things he didn't need, and ultimately paved the way out of slavery. Most men who develop the habit of debt won't have the chance to recover in time to save themselves, because debt is something like quicksand, pulling its victim deeper into the muck. The fear of poverty is one of the most destructive of the 6 basic fears described in Lesson 3. The man who becomes irreparably indebted expresses this fear of poverty. His ambition and self-confidence are paralyzed, and he gradually sinks into oblivion. There are 2 types of debts that are so different and deserve to be described here as follows. 1. Debts incurred for luxuries that become a dead loss. 2. Debts incurred in the course of professional or commercial business that represent a service or goods that can eventually become an asset. The first type of debt must be avoided, while the second type can be tolerated as long as the debtor uses judgment and does not go beyond reasonable limits. At the point where one buys beyond their means, they enter the realm of speculation, and speculation devours more victims than it enriches. Practically everyone living beyond their means is tempted to speculate in the hope of recovering it all in one turn of the wheel of fortune. As it goes, the wheel typically stops in the wrong place, and far from being debt-free, those who engage in speculation become more tightly bound as slaves to debt. The fear of poverty breaks the will of its victims, who see themselves as incapable of recovering their lost fortunes, and more sadly, lose all ambition to break free from the slavery of debt. It is rare that a day goes by without us reading in the newspapers about at least one suicide resulting from debt worry. Slavery alone causes more suicides each year than all other causes combined, which is a slight indicator of the cruelty of the fear of poverty. During the war, millions of men faced the frontline trenches without flinching, knowing that death could reach them at any moment. These same men, when facing the fear of poverty, often become discouraged and, through pure despair that paralyzes their reason, come to suicide. The person who is free from debt can overcome poverty and achieve extraordinary financial success. But if they are chained by debt, achievement is only a distant possibility and never a probability. The fear of poverty is a negative and destructive mindset. Moreover, a negative mindset tends to attract other similar mindsets. For example, the fear of poverty can attract the fear of poor health, and these 2 fears can attract the fear of aging, so the victim finds themselves immersed in poverty with poor health, and actually aging well before they should begin to show signs of aging. Millions of early nameless graves have been filled by this cruel mental state, known as the fear of poverty. Less than a dozen years ago, a young man held a responsible position at City National Bank in New York. By living beyond his means, he accumulated a large amount of debt, which caused him so much distress that this destructive habit began to manifest in his work, and he was fired from the bank. He found another job with less pay, but his creditors humiliated him so much that he decided to quit and move to another city where he hoped to avoid them until he had saved enough money to pay off his debts. Creditors have a way of finding debtors, so it wasn't long before they were on the heels of this young man, whose employer discovered his debt and fired him from his position. He then searched in vain for a job for 2 months. One cold evening, he headed to the top of one of the tall buildings on Broadway and jumped into the void. Debt had claimed another victim. How to tame the fear of poverty? To overcome the fear of poverty, 2 very concrete steps must be taken. First, give up the habit of buying on credit, then gradually pay off the accumulated debts. Once freed from the worry of debt, you are ready to renew the habits of your mind and redirect your course toward prosperity. Make the habit of saving a regular portion of your income, even if it's just 1 penny a day, a part of your defined major goal. Very soon, this habit will start to take hold in your mind, and you will truly enjoy saving. Any habit can be abandoned by building a more desirable habit in its place. The habit of spending must be replaced by the habit of saving for anyone who seeks financial independence. It is not enough to interrupt an undesirable habit, because these habits tend to resurface unless the space they occupy in the mind is filled with another habit of a different nature. Interrupting a habit leaves a void in the mind, and that must be filled with another form of habit, or else the old one will return to reclaim its place. Throughout this course, many psychological forms have been described, and the student has been encouraged to memorize and practice them. You will find one of these formulas in the third lesson, which aims to develop self-confidence. These formulas can be internalized to become an integral part of your mental machinery through the law of habit if you follow the accompanying instructions for use. It is assumed that you are striving for financial independence. Accumulating money is not difficult once you have mastered the fear of poverty and developed in its place the habit of saving. The author of this course would be very disappointed to learn that a student has gotten the impression that success is measured solely in dollars. However, money is an important factor in success and should be given its due importance in any philosophy that claims to help people become useful, happy, and prosperous. The cold, cruel, and relentless truth is that in this age of materialism, a person is like a grain of sand, which can be swept away by any wind of circumstance unless they are backed by the power of money. Genius can offer many rewards to those who possess it, but the fact remains that genius without money with which to express it is just an empty, skeletal honor. The man without money is at the mercy of the man who has it, regardless of his skills, education, or the natural ingenuity he has been endowed with by nature. There is no way to escape the fact that people will measure you by your bank balance, no matter who you are or what you can do. The first question that arises in most people's minds when they meet a stranger is, how much money does he have? If you have money, you will be welcomed into homes and offered business opportunities. All kinds of attention will be given to you. You are a prince, and as such, you are entitled to the best of the earth. But if your shoes are worn at the heels, your clothes are not pressed, your collar is dirty and clearly shows signs of a depleted economy, woe to you because the passing crowd will trample your feet and throw the smoke of disrespect in your face. These statements are not pleasant, but they have a virtue. They are true. This tendency to judge people by the money they have or their ability to control money is not limited to one class of people. We all have a bit of it, whether we recognize it or not. Thomas Edison is one of the most famous and respected inventors in the world. However, it is not incorrect to say that he would have remained a practically unknown and obscure figure if he had not followed the habit of preserving his resources and demonstrated his ability to save. Henry Ford would never have reached first base with his horseless carriage if he had not developed from an early age the habit of saving. Furthermore, if Mr. Ford had not preserved his resources and shielded himself behind his power, he would have been swallowed up by his competitors or those who eagerly wanted to snatch his business away. Many years ago, many men traveled a long way towards success, only to stumble and fall, never to rise again due to lack of money. In times of emergency, the annual death rate in business due to a lack of capital reserved for emergencies is considerable. More business failures are attributed to this cause than to all others combined. Reserve funds are essential for the proper functioning of businesses. Similarly, savings accounts are essential for the success of individuals. Without a savings fund, the individual suffers in two ways. First, due to the inability to seize opportunities that come only to those with a little liquid cash. Second, from the shame of an unexpected emergency requiring cash. One could also say that the individual suffers from a third aspect by failing to develop the habit of saving due to a lack of other essential qualities for success, which emerge from the practice of the saving habit. The 5 and 10-cent coins that the average citizen lets slip away, if saved systematically and used correctly, will eventually ensure financial independence. Making money and saving money is a science, but the rules that govern the accumulation of money are so simple that anyone can follow them. The main requirement is the willingness to subordinate the present to the future by eliminating unnecessary spending on luxuries. The first question that will arise is, how much should one save? The answer cannot be given in a few words because the amount to save depends on many conditions, some within our control and others not. In general, a man who works for a salary should allocate his income as follows: 20% to savings, 50% to food, clothing and basic expenses, 10% to education, 10% to leisure, 10% to life insurance, and thus they will achieve 100%. However, Below is the approximate breakdown that the average man actually makes of his income. 0% to savings, 60% to food, clothing, and basic expenses, 0% to education, 35% to leisure, 5% to life insurance. And there you go, the total is 100%. Under the category of leisure, of course, many expenses are included that aren't truly recreational, such as money spent on alcoholic drinks, dinners, and other similar items that can actually undermine health and destroy character. An experienced analyst of men claimed that he could tell with great accuracy, by examining a man's monthly budget, what kind of life he leads. That is, he would obtain most of his information from the entertainment category. Therefore, it is an element that should be observed carefully, just as the keeper of a greenhouse watches the thermometer that controls the life and death of his plants. Those who manage budgetary circumstances often have a category called entertainment, which in most cases turns out to be harmful because it significantly depletes income. Furthermore, when taken to excess, it also affects health. We currently live in a time where the entertainment category is too high in most budgets. Tens of thousands of people who earn less than $50 a week spend up to a third of their income on what they call entertainment, which comes in a bottle with a dubious label, costing $6 to $12 per litre. These reckless people are not only wasting money that should go into a savings fund, but far more dangerously, they are destroying their character and health. Nothing in this lesson claims to be a sermon on morality or any other subject. We are dealing here with objective facts that largely constitute the building materials from which success can be created. However, this is an appropriate place to expose a few facts that have such a direct relationship to the subject of success that they cannot be omitted without weakening the entire course, and particularly this lesson. The author of this course is neither a reformer nor a preacher of morality, as this area of useful effort is quite well covered by other competent workers. What is presented here, therefore, claims to be a necessary part of a philosophy course whose goal is to chart a sure path to achievement and honor. In 1926, the author partnered with the late Don Relemillet, who was then the editor of the Canton, Ohio Daily News. Mr. Melek became interested in the philosophy of the law of success because, in his opinion, it provided good advice to young people of both sexes who truly wanted to succeed in life. Through the pages of the Daily News, Mr. Melek waged a fierce battle against the forces of crime in Canton, with the help of detectives and investigators partly provided by the Ohio government. In July 1926, Mr. Melek was ambushed and murdered, and 4 men, including a former member of the Canton Police, are now serving life sentences in the Ohio State Prison for this crime. During the investigation into the crime conditions in Canton, all reports came to the author's office, and the data described here are therefore known to be absolutely accurate. One of the executives of a large industrial factory, earning $6,000 per year, paid a Canton bootlegger an average of $300 per month for the alcohol, if it can be called alcohol, that he used to entertain himself. The wife participated in these entertainments, which took place in their own home. A bank cashier, earning $150 per month, spent an average of $75 per month on spirits, in addition to the unforgivable waste of a not very high salary. At best, he traveled at a pace and with a crowd that meant ruin for him. Later, the director of a large factory, whose salary was $5,000 per year and should have saved at least $125 per month, in reality saved nothing. His bootlegger bill averaged $150 per month. A policeman earning $160 per month spent more than $400 per month on scenes at a nearby roadhouse bar. Where the difference between his legitimate income and his actual spending came from is a question that does not reflect well on the police. A bank employee whose income, based on tax returns from previous years, was estimated to be around $8,000 per year, had a monthly bootlegging bill of more than $500. During the first 3 months of his activities, they were verified by Mr. Melek's investigators. A young man working in a department store with a salary of $20 per week spent an average of $35 per week with a bootlegger. It was assumed that he was stealing the difference from his employer. This young man was waiting for Oldman Trouble around the corner of the street, though the author does not know if they ever met. A salesman for a life insurance company, whose income was unknown because he worked on commission, spent an average of $200 per month with a bootlegger. No record of a savings account was found, and it is assumed that he had none. This assumption was later confirmed when the company for which the young man worked fired him for embezzlement. He was undoubtedly spending the money he should have handed over to the company and is now serving a long sentence at the Ohio State Prison. A young man attending high school spent large amounts of money on alcohol, the actual amount of which could not be obtained because he paid in cash as he got the alcohol. The bootlegger's records, therefore, did not reveal the actual amount. Later, the boy's parents locked him up to save him from himself. It was discovered that he had been stealing money from a savings fund that his mother had hidden somewhere in the house. He had stolen and spent over $300 from this money by the time he was caught. When this author was running a lecture bureau in 41 high schools, where he gave a lecture once a month throughout the school season, the principals of these high schools stated that less than 2% of students showed any tendency to save money. An examination, carried out with a questionnaire prepared for that purpose, revealed that only 5% of the students, out of a total of 11,000 who were of high school age, believed that the habit of saving was one of the essential elements for success. It is no wonder that the rich become richer and the poor become poorer. Call this a socialist statement, if you will, but the facts confirm its accuracy. It is not difficult for any man to become rich in a country as prodigal as this, where millions of people spend every penny that passes through their hands. Many years ago, before the current wave of spending frenzy spread throughout the country, F.W.L. Swarth had a very simple method for recovering the 5 and 10-cent coins that millions of people threw away, and his system earned him more than $100 million in just a few years. He passed away, but his 5-cent saving system continues, and his estate continues to grow. The 5 and dime stores are usually painted with a bright red facade. It's an appropriate color because red means danger. Each 5 and dime store is a striking monument that demonstrates one of the cardinal flaws of this generation, the habit of spending everything. We are all victims of this habit. Unfortunately, most of us are raised by parents who have no idea of the psychology of habit, and without being aware of their guilt, most parents help their children develop the habit of spending by indulging them excessively in spending money, and by failing to teach them the habit of saving. Childhood habits stick with us throughout our lives. A lucky child is one whose parents have the foresight and understanding of the value of saving as a builder of character. Instilling this habit in their children's minds is training that brings rich rewards. Give the average man $100 that he did not expect to receive, and what will he do with it? He will begin to think of how to spend the money. Dozens of things that he needs or thinks he needs will come to mind. But it is fairly certain that it would never occur to him, unless he has acquired the habit of saving, to make those $100 the start of a savings account. Before nightfall, he will have spent the $100, or at least decided mentally how to spend it, thus adding more fuel to the already too bright flame of the spending habit. We are governed by our habits. It takes strength of character, determination, and a firm power of decision to open a savings account and regularly add even a small portion of all subsequent income to it. There is a rule by which any man can determine well in advance whether or not he will enjoy the universally desired freedom and financial independence. And this rule has absolutely nothing to do with the amount of his income. The rule is that if a man follows the systematic habit of saving a defined portion of all the money he earns or receives by other means, he is virtually certain to put himself in a position of financial independence. If he saves nothing, he is absolutely certain never to be financially independent, no matter how much his income is. The only exception to this rule is that a man who saves nothing might inherit an amount of money so large that he could not spend it, or he might inherit it in a trust that would protect it for him. But these eventualities are quite rare. In fact, you cannot count on such a miracle. This author has a fairly close relationship with hundreds of people in the United States and a few foreign countries. For nearly 25 years he has observed many of these acquaintances and knows from first-hand experience how they live, because some of them failed while others succeeded, and the reasons for failure and success. This list of acquaintances includes men who control hundreds of millions of dollars and who actually possess many millions they have acquired. There are also men who had millions of dollars, all of which slipped through their fingers and who are now penniless, in order to show the student of this philosophy how the law of habit becomes a sort of pivot on which success or failure turns, and exactly why no man can become financially independent without developing the habit of systematic saving, The life habits of some of these many acquaintances will be described. Let us begin with a complete story, in his own words, of a man who earned $1 million in the advertising field, but now has nothing to show for his efforts. This story first appeared in American magazine and is reproduced here with the kind permission of the editors of that publication. The story is true in every respect and has been included as part of this lesson because the author of the story, Mr. W.C. Freeman, is willing for his mistakes to be made public in the hope that others may avoid them. I earned $1 million, but I don't have a cent. Although it is shameful and humiliating to publicly confess a lingering fault that has created a problem in my current life, I have nevertheless decided to make this confession for the good it may bring. I will start fresh about how all the money I have earned so far in my life, which amounts to nearly $1 million, slipped through my fingers. I earned this amount through my work in advertising, except for a few $1,000s I earned at the age of 25, teaching in rural schools and writing newsletters for a few weekly papers and local newspapers. Perhaps $1 million doesn't seem like much money these days, with millions, even billions in circulation. However, it's still a large sum of money. If anyone doubts this, let them try counting $1 million. The other night, I tried to calculate how long it would take me to do it. I found I could count an average of 100 per minute. On that basis, it would take me 20 days of 8 hours each, plus 6 hours and 40 minutes on the 21st day to accomplish the task. I strongly doubt that if we were given the task of counting $1 million $1 bills, with the promise that all would be ours at the end of this time, we could finish it. Probably we would go crazy and the money wouldn't do us any good. So let me say, right from the start of my story, that I do not regret a minute of spending 90% of the money I earned. I do wish that something of that 90% could be returned to me now, which would make me feel that I had denied much happiness to my family and many others. The only thing I regret is spending all my money, and much more. If I had today the 10% that I could have easily saved, I would have $100,000 invested safely and without debt. If I had that money, I would truly feel rich, and I only speak of this because I never had the desire to accumulate money just for the sake of accumulation. Those days of teaching and correspondence for the newspaper brought me some worries and responsibilities, but I faced them with optimism. I married at 21 with the full approval of both families, who fully believed in the doctrine preached by Henry Watcher, which held that early marriages are virtuous marriages. Just 1 month and 1 day after my marriage, my father tragically passed away. He died from asphyxiation due to coal gas, having been an educator all his life, and one of the best. He hadn't accumulated any money, and when he left our family circle, he united us all and kept us well supported in one way or another, and that's what we did. Aside from the void that my father's death left in our home, my wife, mother, only sister and I lived together. We had a joyful life, although it was very difficult to make ends meet. My mother, who had exceptional talents and resources, had taught at school with my father until my birth. She decided to open our home to a couple who were old family friends. They came to live with us and their pension helped pay the expenses. My mother was known worldwide for the wonderful meals she served. Later, 2 wealthy women, friends of the family, were welcomed into our home. So, our income increased. My sister helped a lot by giving lessons which she held in the large living room of our house with students. My wife contributed to the household by taking care of sewing and alterations. These were very happy days. No one in the house was extravagant or had extravagant tendencies, except perhaps myself, as I have always tended to be free with money. I enjoyed giving gifts to the family and treating friends. When the first baby, a boy, arrived in our home, we all thought heaven had opened its doors to us. My wife's parents, who cared deeply about our affairs and were always ready to help us, also rejoiced at the arrival of their first grandson. My brother-in-law, much older than my wife and single, couldn't understand at first the joy we felt, but even he eventually strutted about like a proud peacock after a while. What a difference a baby can make in a home. I introduce these details into my story simply to highlight how the early days of my life were lived. I didn't have the opportunity to spend a lot of money, and yet I had as much happiness at that time as I have had since then. What is strange about all this is that the experience of those days didn't teach me the value of money. If anyone ever had a practical lesson that would guide them in the future, it is undoubtedly me. But let me tell you how this early experience affected me. The birth of my son inspired me to do something that would allow me to earn more money than I was making teaching at school and writing for newspapers. I didn't want my wife, mother, and sister to feel that they had to keep contributing indefinitely to support the household. A tall, strong, healthy man like I had always been with reasonable ability should not just settle for being a cog in the wheel. Why shouldn't I be the whole wheel when it came to supporting the family? Following my desire to earn more money, I ventured into bookselling, in addition to teaching and writing for newspapers. This allowed me to earn enough extra money. Eventually, I left teaching and focused on selling books and writing for newspapers. The bookselling led me to Bridgeton, New Jersey, where I had my first true financial breakthrough. I had to spend a lot of time away from home to do this work, but the sacrifice was worth it. In a few weeks, I made enough money to send more back home than I had brought home in an entire year from teaching at school and newspaper correspondence. After touring the Bridgeton area, I became interested in a newspaper in that town, the Morning Star. It seemed to me that the editor and publisher of that paper needed an assistant. I called them and said, "Well, young man, how can I hire you? I don't make enough money to support myself." "That's true," I said. "I think together we can make Morning Star a success. Here's what I will do. I'll work for you for a week for $1 a day. At the end of the week, if I've done my job well, I'll expect you to pay me $3 a day for the second week. And then, if I continue to do my job well, I'll expect you to pay me $6 a day for the third week. And I'll continue this way until the newspaper earns enough to pay me $50 a week." The owner agreed to my proposal. After 2 months, I was being paid $50 a week, which was considered a good salary at the time. I began to feel that I was on the right path to earning money, but all I wanted was to make my family's life more comfortable. $50 a week was 4 times what I had earned teaching at school. My work at Morning Star included writing lackluster editorials, preparing ordinary news reports, writing and selling advertisements with some success, proofreading, collecting bills, and so on. I had to work 6 days a week, but I could handle it because I was strong and healthy, and besides, the work was very interesting. I also contributed to the correspondence of the New York Sun, Philadelphia Record, and Trenton NJ Times, which earned me an average of $150 a month, as it was a good information territory. At Morning Star, I learned a lesson that eventually changed the course of my life. I discovered that you could make far more money selling advertising for newspapers than writing for them. Advertising leads to mills, and if an advertising campaign in the Star included an article about the oyster industry in southern New Jersey paid by the oyster farmers, which earned me $3,000 in cash, which the editor shared with me 50%, I had never seen so much money at one time in my life. Think about it. $1,500, which was 25% more than I had earned in 2 years of teaching and odd jobs. I saved that money, or at least part of it. I didn't spend it. What for? It could have been so useful to be happy with my wife, son, mother, and sister. I let it go much more easily than I would have, but it wouldn't have been a good thing if I had kept that money for a rainy day. My work in Bridgeton caught the attention of Sam Hudson, a correspondent for the Philadelphia Record in New Jersey, who was a brilliant example of those kinds of journalists whose greatest pleasure in life is doing things for others. Sam told me it was time for me to settle in a big city, believing I had the potential to succeed. He said he would find me a job in Philadelphia, which he did, and I moved with my wife and baby to Germantown. I was assigned to the advertising department of the Germantown Philadelphia Gazette, a weekly newspaper. At first, I didn't earn as much money as I had in Bridgeton because I had to give up newspaper correspondence. The news for that section was covered by other correspondents, but very quickly, I was making 25% more money. The Gazette tripled in size to accommodate the advertising, and I received a very substantial raise. Additionally, I was given the task of gathering social news for the Sunday edition of the Philadelphia Press. Bradford Mary, the editor of the paper, who is now a prominent media executive in New York, assigned me a large area to cover. This kept me busy every night of the week except Saturdays. I was paid $5 per column, but I averaged 7 columns each Sunday, which earned me an additional $35 per week. I had more money to spend, and I spent it. I knew nothing about budgeting my expenses. I just let them come as they did. I didn't have the time, or I thought I didn't have the time, to monitor my spending. A year later, I was invited to join the advertising team at the Philadelphia Press, a great opportunity for a young man, as I received excellent training under the leadership of William Klein, now the owner of the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. I continued to keep my position as a social news gatherer, so my income was almost the same as what I had earned in Germantown. But shortly after, my work attracted the attention of James Elderson, the editor of Old Saturday Night and Golden Days, which he had just purchased in Philadelphia. I was offered and accepted the position of advertising director for this newspaper, which resulted in a substantial increase in my income. Soon after, a happy addition to my family came with the birth of a daughter. At that moment, I was able to realize what I had desired since the birth of my son, to reunite my family under one roof. My wife, my 2 babies, my mother and my sister were finally together. I was able to free my mother from all worry and responsibility, and she never had another worry until her death at the age of 81, 25 years after my father's death. I will never forget the words Will said to me. "You never caused a moment of worry since you were born, and I couldn't have asked for more than what you've given me if I were the Queen of England." At that point, I was earning 4 times more than my father had as the superintendent of public schools in my hometown of Billsburg, New Jersey. However, all the money was slipping out of my pockets as easily as water flows through a sieve. Expenses increased with every raise in income, as is customary, I suppose, for most people. However, there was no sensible reason for me to let my spending exceed my income, and yet that's exactly what I did. I accumulated debts, and from that point on I was never free of debt. However, I didn't worry about my debts because I thought I could pay them off at any time. It never occurred to me, until 25 years later, that debt would eventually bring me not only great anxiety and unhappiness, but also the loss of friends and credit. But I must give myself a pat on the back for one thing. I gave full rein to my great flaw of spending money as quickly as I earned it, often faster, but I never shirked my work. I was always trying to find more things to do, and I always found them. I spent very little time with my family. I came home for dinner every evening and rested with the babies until their bedtime. Then I would return to work. The years passed and another daughter was born. Now I wanted my daughters to have a pony and a cart, and for my son to have a saddle horse. Then I thought I needed equipment to transport us from place to place with my family, driving them in a closed coupe or a convertible. I got all of this instead of a horse and cart, or perhaps a pair that would have sufficed for our needs and that we could afford. I had to have a stable with all that it entailed. It cost me nearly a quarter of my annual income. Next, I got into golf. It was when I was 41 years old. I dedicated myself to the game as much as to work, putting my whole heart into it. I learned to play quite well. My son and eldest daughter played with me and also learned to play well. It was necessary for my youngest daughter to spend the winter in the south and the summers in the Adirondacks. But instead of just her mother going with her, it seemed to me that it would be nice if my son and other daughter also went with them. This arrangement was made. They went to Painesville, Northern California, every winter, and to resorts in the Adirondacks or New Hampshire in the summer. All of this cost a lot of money. My son and eldest daughter were passionate about golf and spent a lot of money on it. And if an advertising campaign in the Star included an article on the oyster industry of southern New Jersey paid for by the oyster farmers, which earned me $3,000 in cash, shared with me 50% by the editor, I had never seen so much money at one time in my entire life. Think about it. $1,500, 25% more than I had earned in 2 years of teaching and odd jobs. I saved that money, or at least part of it. I didn't spend it. What for? It could have been so useful for happiness with my wife, son, mother, and sister. I let it go much more easily than I would have, but it wouldn't have been a good thing if I had kept that money for a rainy day. My work in Bridgeton attracted the attention of Sam Hudson, a correspondent for the Philadelphia Record in New Jersey, who was a brilliant example of those kinds of journalists whose greatest pleasure in life is doing things for others. Sam told me it was time for me to settle in a big city, believing I had the potential to succeed. He said he would find me a job in Philadelphia, which he did, and I moved with my wife and baby to Germantown. I was assigned to the advertising department of the Germantown Philadelphia Gazette, a weekly newspaper. At first, I didn't earn as much money as I had in Bridgeton, because I had to give up correspondence for the paper. The news for that section was covered by other correspondents, but very quickly I was making 25% more money. The Gazette tripled in size to accommodate advertising, and I received a very substantial raise. Additionally, I was tasked with gathering social news for the Sunday edition of the Philadelphia Press. Bradford Mary, the editor of this paper, who is now a major media executive in New York, assigned me a large area to cover. This kept me busy every night of the week except Saturdays. I was paid $5 per column, but I averaged 7 columns every Sunday, which earned me an additional $35 per week. I had more money to spend, and I spent it. I knew nothing about budgeting my expenses. I just let them come as they did. I didn't have the time, or I thought I didn't have the time, to monitor my spending. A year later, I was invited to join the advertising team at the Philadelphia Press, a great opportunity for a young man, as I received excellent training under the leadership of William Klein, now the owner of the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. I continued to keep my position as a social news gatherer, so my income was practically the same as what I had earned in Germantown. But shortly after, my work caught the attention of James Elderson, the editor of Old Saturday Night and Golden Days, which he had just bought in Philadelphia. I was offered and accepted the position of advertising director for this newspaper, which led to a significant increase in my income. Soon after, a happy addition to my family came with the birth of a daughter. At that moment, I was able to realize what I had desired since the birth of my son: to reunite my family under one roof. My wife, my 2 babies, my mother and my sister were finally together. I was able to free my mother from all worry and responsibility, and she never had another worry until her death at the age of 81, 25 years after my father's death. I will never forget the words Will said to me: "You never caused a moment of worry since you were born, and I couldn't have asked for more than what you've given me if I were the Queen of England." At that point, I was earning 4 times as much money as my father did as the superintendent of public schools in my hometown of Billsburg, New Jersey. However, all the money was slipping through my pockets as easily as water passes through a sieve. Expenses increased with every raise, as is the custom, I suppose, for most people. However, there was no sensible reason for my expenses to exceed my income, and yet that is exactly what I did. I accumulated debt, and from that moment on I was never free from debt. However, I wasn't worried about my debt because I thought I could pay it off at any time. It never occurred to me, until 25 years later, that debt would eventually bring me not only great anxiety and misery, but also the loss of friends and credit. But I must give myself credit for one thing. I gave free rein to my great flaw of spending money as quickly as I earned it, often more quickly. But I never shied away from my work. I was always trying to find more things to do, and I always found them. I spent very little time with my family. I came home for dinner every evening and rested with the babies until their bedtime. Then I would return to work. The years passed, and another daughter was born. Now, I wanted my daughters to have a pony and a cart, and for my son to have a saddle horse. Then I thought I needed equipment to transport us from place to place with my family, driving them in a closed coupe or a convertible. I got all of this instead of a horse and cart, or perhaps a pair that would have sufficed for our needs and that we could afford. I had to have a stable with all that it entailed. It cost me nearly a quarter of my annual income. Next, I took up golf. It was when I was 41 years old. I devoted myself to the game as much as to work, putting my whole heart into it. I learned to play quite well. My son and eldest daughter played with me and also learned to play well. It was necessary for my youngest daughter to spend the winter in the South and the summers in the Adirondacks. But instead of just her mother going with her, it seemed to me that it would be nice if my son and other daughter also went with them. This arrangement was made. They went to Painesville, Northern California, every winter, and to resorts in the Adirondacks or New Hampshire in the summer. All of this cost a lot of money. My son and eldest daughter were passionate about golf and spent a lot of money on it. I also spent a lot on New York's golf courses. Between the 3 of us, we won 80 prizes, most of which are now stored away. One day, I took the time to calculate what those awards had cost me. I discovered that each trophy had cost $250, for a total of $45,000 over a period of 15 years, averaging $3,000 per year. Ridiculous. I had no hesitation in being generous at home. The people in Montclair thought I was a millionaire. I often invited groups of businessmen to spend a day of golf at the club and then dine at my house in the evening. They would have been content with a simple home-cooked meal, but I didn't have to serve them an elaborate event arranged by a famous caterer. These dinners never cost less than $10 per plate, not counting the money spent on music during dinner, and a black string quartet often came to the house. Our dining room could comfortably seat 20 people and was often full. Everything was very pleasant, and I was happy to be their host. In fact, I felt very happy about it. I never took the time to reflect on how quickly I was accumulating debt. The day came when they started to bother me a great deal. One month, I had hosted so many guests at the golf club, paying for lunches, cigars, and green fees, that my bill amounted to $450. This caught the attention of the club directors, who were all good friends of mine and who cared deeply about my well-being. They insisted on telling me that I was spending too much money and wished for my own good that I control my spending. This gave me a little jolt and made me think seriously, enough to get rid of my horses and traps. A great sacrifice, of course. I left our home and moved to the city, but I left no bills unpaid in Montclair. I borrowed money to pay them, and it was always easy for me to get all the money I needed, despite my well-known financial shortcomings. 2 side notes on my experience during my 40 years of career. In addition to spending money recklessly and perhaps irresponsibly, I also lent it out with the same abandon. While cleaning out my home office before moving to the city, I came across a set of unpaid bills, totaling over $40,000. This was money I had given away to anyone who came by. I tore them all up, but I realized that if I had that money in hand, I wouldn't owe anyone anything. One of the successful businessmen I had often spoiled and who had also spoiled me said to me, "Billy, I have to stop hanging out with you. You spend too much money on me. I can't keep up with your pace. Think about it." These words came from a man who earned more money than I did, and I should have taken it to heart, but I didn't. I continued spending the same way, foolishly thinking I was having fun and not thinking about the future. This man is now one of the vice presidents of one of the largest financial institutions in New York, and they say he's worth several $1,000,000. I should have followed his advice. In the fall of 1908, after my disastrous 6-month experience in another line of work following my resignation from the Hertz organization, I returned to journalistic work as the advertising director for the New York Mail. I had met Henry the Student, the owner and publisher, back in Philadelphia when I was a political correspondent for the press. Despite the debts that tormented me, I did the best work of my life at the Mail and earned more money in the 5 years I was associated with him than I had ever earned before. Moreover, Mr. Stewart granted me the privilege of syndicating advertising speeches that would appear in his newspaper for 1,000 consecutive days, which earned me over $55,000. Mr. Stewart was very generous in many ways, and often paid me special sums of money to do what he considered unusual things to develop the business. During this period, I was so deeply in debt that, in order to make things work as smoothly as possible without cutting any of my expenses, I borrowed money from Peter to pay Paul, and from Paul to pay Peter. The $55,000 earned through the syndication of advertising speeches would have more than paid off all my debts and still left me with a nice sum. However, it was all spent just as easily as if I had no concern in the world. In 1915, I took my independence in the advertising field. From then until the spring of 1922, my fees reached very high figures. I continued to earn more money than ever and spent it just as quickly as I earned it, until eventually my friends grew tired of lending me money. Had I shown the slightest inclination to curb my spending, even by 10%, these wonderful men would have been willing to share with me 50%, allowing me to pay 5% and save 5%. It wasn't so much about repaying the money they had lent me that mattered to them, but they wanted to see me get back on my feet. The shock to my business came 5 years later. 2 friends who had loyally supported me became impatient and told me frankly that I needed a radical lesson. They forced me to declare bankruptcy, which nearly broke my heart. I felt that all the people I knew were pointing their fingers at me with disdain. It was a great folly. Although the comments were not at all hostile, they expressed deep regret that a man who had achieved such prestige in his profession and earned so much money had allowed himself to fall into financial difficulties. Proud and sensitive to the core, I felt the misery of bankruptcy with such intensity that I decided to go to Florida, where I had already done special work for a client. It seemed to me that it was the next El Dorado. I thought that maybe I could earn enough money in a few years to come back to New York, not only with a skill, but with enough to pay off all my debts in full. For a while it seemed like I was going to achieve this ambition, but I got caught up in the great real estate collapse. So here I am back in the old town where I once had great purchasing power and hundreds of friends and supporters. It was a strange experience. One thing is certain, I have finally learned my lesson. I am sure opportunities will arise for me to redeem myself, and I will regain the ability to earn money. And when that time comes, I know I will be able to live as well as I did before with 40% of my income. Then, I will divide the remaining 60% into two parts, reserving 30% to pay off my creditors and 30% for insurance and savings. If I allowed myself to feel depressed by my past, or filled my mind with worries, I would not be able to keep fighting to move forward. Moreover, it would be ungrateful toward my Creator, who has blessed me with wonderful health throughout my life. Is there a greater blessing? It would be ungrateful to the memory of my parents, whose remarkable upbringing kept me firmly grounded in moral standards. Loosening moral moorings is infinitely more serious in the end than loosening the standard of saving. I would also fail to thank for the stimulus and support I received in abundance from hundreds of entrepreneurs and many good friends who helped me build a good reputation in my profession. These memories are the sunshine of my life, and I will use them to pave the way for my future achievements with an abundance of health, unshakable faith, tireless energy, incessant optimism, and unlimited confidence that a man can win his battle, even if he starts late in life realizing the type of struggle he must undertake. There is something more than death to stop him. Mr. Freeman's story is the same that thousands of other men who don't set anything aside could tell, except that the amounts of their incomes will vary. The way of living, how money is spent, and why, as told in Mr. Freeman's account, show the workings of the mind of the spender. The compilation of statistics on income and family expenditures from more than 16,000 families of men, analyzed by the author, revealed some data that will be useful to people wanting to budget their income and expenses on a practical, solid, and economical basis. The average incomes range from $100 to $300 per month. The budget allocation covering the incomes of these two amounts should be approximately as follows. A two-person family with an income of $100 per month should be able to set aside at least $10 to $12 per month for savings. The cost of housing or rent should not exceed $25 to $30 per month. Food expenses should be around $25 to $30. Clothing should stay within a range of $15 to $20 per month. Unexpected entertainment expenses should be kept to about $8 to $10 per month. A family whose income is $100 per month, if these earnings increase to $125, should save at least $20 from this amount. A two-person family with an income of $150 per month should budget their funds as follows. Savings $25, housing or rent $35 to $40, food $35 to $40, clothing $20 to $30, entertainment $10 to $15. With a salary of $200 per month, the budget should be as follows. Savings $50, housing or rent $40 to $50, food $35 to $45, clothing $30 to $35, entertainment $15 to $20. A two-person family with an income of $300 per month should allocate their income approximately as follows. Savings $55 to $65, housing or rent $45 to $60, food $45 to $60, clothing $35 to $45, entertainment and education $50 to $75. Some might argue that a two-person family earning $300 per month could live as cheaply as a family earning only $100 or $125. However, this is not entirely accurate because someone who has the ability to earn $300 per month will generally associate with people who have better appearances and more necessary entertainment. A single man earning $100, $150, or $300 per month should save considerably more than a man with a family could save with the same amounts. As a general rule, a single man without dependents and without debts should live with a budget of $50 per month for housing and food, and not exceed $30 per month for clothing, and perhaps $10 for entertainment. These amounts could be slightly increased for someone earning $150 or $300 per month. A young man living on his own with a weekly income of $20 should save $5 from this amount, with the rest covering food, housing, and clothing expenses. A young woman living on her own with the same income would need a slightly higher allowance for clothing, as women's clothing is more expensive than men's, and it is generally imperative for women to take more care with their appearance than men. A family of 3 will be able to save much less than the amounts that a two-person family could save. However, except in rare cases, such as when the family has debts that must be absorbed with the monthly income, Any family can save at least 5% of gross income. It is common nowadays for families to acquire cars with monthly payments that represent a disproportionate expense compared to their income. A man with Ford's earnings doesn't need to buy a Studebaker car. He should curb his desires and settle for a Ford. Many single men spend all their income and often go into debt because of cars that do not match their income. This common practice is fatal to success, inasmuch as financial independence can be considered a part of success. Since the beginning of World War I, there has been a constant demand for practically everything manufactured in the United States, and this condition of prosperity has led people to fall into a state of careless and unjustified spending. There is no virtue in keeping up with the neighbors when it means sacrificing the habit of saving a regular portion of income. It is much better in the long run to be considered a bit old-fashioned than to spend youth, maturity, and eventually old age without acquiring the habit of systematic saving. It is better to sacrifice during youth than to be forced to do so during maturity, as most people who have not developed the saving habit must do. There is nothing as humiliating, with as much agony and suffering, as poverty in old age, when personal services are no longer marketable and one must turn to relatives or charitable institutions to survive. All people, whether married or single, should maintain a budget system, but no budget system will work if the person attempting to maintain it lacks the courage to reduce expenses in areas such as entertainment and leisure. If one feels so weak-willed that they think it necessary to keep up with the Smiths, with whom they are socially connected and whose incomes exceed their own, or if they spend all their income recklessly, then no budget system can help. Acquiring the habit of saving means that at least at some point, you must isolate yourself from all but a carefully selected group of friends who appreciate you without requiring elaborate entertainment from you. Admitting that you lack the courage to reduce expenses and save, even a small amount, is to simultaneously admit a lack of the type of character that leads to success. It has been repeatedly shown that people who have acquired the habit of saving money are always preferred for positions of responsibility. Therefore, saving money not only adds benefits to the nature of the preferred job and the larger bank balance, but it also increases real earning potential. Every entrepreneur would prefer to hire someone who saves money regularly, not simply because this person saves money, but because of all the traits that make them more effective. Many companies will not hire a man or woman who does not save money. It should be common practice for all companies to require all employees to save money. This would be a blessing for thousands of people who otherwise would not have the will to develop the habit of saving. Henry Ford has come a long way, perhaps as far as is practical, in encouraging his employees not only to save their money, but also to spend wisely what they spend and to live healthily and economically. The man who encourages his employees to acquire the habit of saving is a practical philanthropist. The opportunities that arise for those who have saved money are numerous. A few years ago, a young man arrived in Philadelphia from Pennsylvania's agricultural district and began working in a printing shop. One of his co-workers held stock in a building and loan company and had adopted the habit of saving $5 per week through this association. This young man was influenced by his co-worker to open an account at the building and loan company. After 3 years, he had saved $900. The printing shop he worked for experienced financial difficulties and was on the brink of bankruptcy. He came to the rescue with his $900 saved in small amounts. In return, he was given half ownership in the business, thus launching a tight saving system. He helped the company pay off its debts, and today he takes in just over $25,000 annually as his share of the profits. This opportunity would have never been possible, or at least he would not have been ready to take advantage of it if he had not acquired the habit of saving money. When the Ford automobile was perfected in its early days of existence, Henry Ford needed capital to promote the manufacturing and selling of his production. He turned to a few friends who had saved a few $1,000s, including Senator Cousins. These friends came to his aid, invested a few $1,000s with him, and then realized millions of dollars in profits. When Woolworth launched his plan for 5 and 10-cent stores, he had no capital, but he appealed to a few friends who had saved a few $1,000s through tight saving and great sacrifice. These friends took a chance on him and then reaped hundreds of thousands of dollars in profits. Van Housen, famous for his soft collars, came up with the idea of producing a semi-rigid collar for men. His idea was good, but he had not a penny to promote it. He turned to a few friends who had only a few $100s, who gave him a chance, and the collar made them all rich. The men who started the cigarette business had little capital, but they had saved money from their modest earnings in tobacco. They had a good idea and knew how to make a good cigar. But the idea would have been dead if it hadn't been saved by a little money saved from their modest savings. They launched the cigar, and a few years later, they sold their company to the American Tobacco Company for $8 million. Behind almost every great fortune, there is a well-developed habit of saving money as a principle. John D. Rockefeller was a simple accountant who came up with the idea of developing the oil industry. But at the time, it was not even considered an industry. He needed capital, and since he had developed the habit of saving and demonstrated that he could manage other people's funds, he had no difficulty borrowing the money he needed. It can be argued that the true foundation of the Rockefeller fortune is the habit of saving money that Mr. Rockefeller developed while working as an accountant, earning $40 a month. James J. Hill was a poor young man working as a telegrapher with a salary of $30 per month. He came up with the idea for the Great Northern Railway system, but his idea was not proportionate to his financial capacity. However, he had acquired the habit of saving money, and with his meager salary of $30 a month, he had saved enough to cover his expenses for a trip to Chicago, where he attracted capitalists to fund his project. The fact that he had saved money himself on a small salary was considered strong evidence that he would be a reliable man to entrust other people's money to. Most businessmen will not entrust their money to another man unless he has proven his ability to take care of it and use it wisely. Although often embarrassing for those who have not developed the habit of saving, it is very practical. A young man working in a printing shop in Chicago wanted to open a small printing business and learn the trade on his own. He approached the manager of a printing shop and explained his needs, saying he wanted credit for a printing press type and other small equipment. The first question the manager asked him was if he had saved money himself. He had done so from his salary of $30 a week, regularly saving $15 a week for nearly 4 years. He obtained the credit he wanted and later secured more credit until he built one of the most prosperous printing businesses in the city of Chicago. His name is George Williams, and he is well known, just like the facts presented here by the author of this course. Many years after this incident, the author of this course met Mr. Williams. At the end of the war in 1918, the author turned to Mr. Williams and asked for credit of several $1,000s to publish the Golden magazine. The first question he asked was whether he had developed the habit of saving. Even though all the money he had saved was lost during the war, the mere fact that he had developed the habit of saving was the real foundation on which I obtained credit of more than $30,000. Opportunities arise on every street corner, but they exist only for those who have money ready or can obtain it because they have developed the habit of saving, and the other characteristics that come with the formation of the habit of saving, commonly known as character. The late J.P. Morgan once said that he would rather lend $1 million to a man of solid character who had developed the habit of saving than $1,000 to a man without character who was generally a spendthrift. This is the attitude the world adopts toward all men who save money. It is often the case that a small savings account of $200 or $300 is enough to start the path to financial independence. A few years ago, a young inventor created a unique and practical household item. As often happens with inventors, he was disadvantaged because he didn't have the money to market his invention. Furthermore, having never developed the habit of saving, it was impossible for him to get a loan from the banks. His roommate was a young mechanic who had saved $200. He came to the inventor's aid with this small sum of money, had enough items made for them to start, went out, and sold the first batch door to door. Then they returned and had another batch made, and so on, until they had accumulated, thanks to the roommate's savings habit, a capital of $1,000. With this and some credit they obtained, they bought the tools to make their own product. 6 years later, the young mechanic sold his half of the business for $250,000. He would never have handled that sum of money in his entire life if he hadn't developed the habit of saving, which enabled him to help his inventor friend. This case could be published 1,000 times with slight variations in the details, as it fairly well describes the beginning of many great fortunes that have been made and are currently being made in the United States. It may seem sad and cruel, but it remains a fact. If you don't have money and haven't developed the habit of saving, you are out of luck when it comes to the possibility of making money. It is not superfluous to repeat, in fact, this should be repeated again and again, that the true beginning of almost all fortunes, whether large or small, is the formation of the habit of saving money. Make sure this fundamental principle is firmly rooted in your mind, and you will be well on your way to financial independence. It is sad to see an elderly man condemn himself to the exhausting ruin of hard work every day of his life because he neglected the habit of saving money. Yet there are millions of men living like this, right here in the United States today. The best thing in life is freedom. There can be no true freedom without a reasonable degree of economic independence. It is terrible to be forced to be in a certain place, doing a certain task, perhaps one that is not liked, for a set number of hours every weekday for the rest of one's life. In a way, it's like being in prison because the options for action are always limited. In reality, it's no better than being in prison with the privilege of a shovel. And in some ways, it's even worse, because the man in prison is relieved of the responsibility of providing a place to sleep, something to eat and clothes to wear. The only way out of this lifetime of work that hinders freedom is to form the habit of saving money, then to live according to that habit, no matter what sacrifices it may require. There is no other solution for millions of people, and unless you are one of the rare exceptions, this lesson and all the factual statements are intended for you and apply to your life. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for often the loan is lost to both the lender and the borrower, and the loan sends the thread of labor. It is above all to be true to yourself, and it must follow as night follows day. You cannot then be false with any man. Shakespeare. Thank you very much for your visit. Thank